Today, we're going to be looking at some clips from James English's latest video. If you guys didn't know, he's going to be competing against AUDEN LARRATT on June the 15th, and we're getting pretty close to that date. So we're going to look firstly at some clips of James doing some maximal wrist strength training in the gym, and then at some sparring clips. I think both of them are very telling and very impressive. So firstly, we're going to look at his numbers on the ultra grip handle. This is 100 pounds. He's doing it for a 3-second hold isometrically. If you guys have never tried this handle before, the Ultra Grip is a very difficult handle. It puts a ton of stress on your fingers, and 100 pounds is really good. The heaviest lift I've ever seen anyone do on this Ultra Grip handle was by Ermes Gasparini, and he ended up lifting 132 pounds, and I think it looked less clean. I think it looked more difficult than James' 100 pounds. Another thing is that James does not have some sort of mechanical advantage for this lift because his fingers are not super long, so he's not really wrapping his hand around this handle like some people with really massive hands would be able to. So this lift is probably even more difficult for him than normal, but he's still managing 100 pounds, which is really good. If AUDEN is able to just top roll through that, I'm going to be super impressed with AUDEN's level. And next, I wanted to take a look at some of his sparring. So of course, James is not a super tall guy, and we see this on the table. James knows what he's doing. He's practicing with people who are taller than he is and people who are doing this kind of low hand top roll, and even some people who are doing king's moves. So this is going to be giving him really good practice for going up against AUDEN. And we see that he is keeping his knuckle high. Of course, his arm is short enough that to a certain extent he's just going to be forced to use his fingers and to use his wrist flexion to contain other people and his downward lat drag pressure, but at the same time, we see that James is doing a really good job, even while starting with the low knuckle position, of forcing his opponent to dump his hand. James is posting enough that he's protecting his own wrist, he's protecting his own hand, and he's forcing his opponent to basically slide underneath his hands. His opponent would much more prefer to be putting pressure this way, right into James' fingers, but he's probably putting pressure more in this angle because he's having to lat drag, because he's failed to match James' up pressure, his rising posting pressure, so now he's kind of pulling underneath. It's still attacking James's fingers, but it's not doing nearly as well. So I think that this kind of posting style we see here from James, where he is maintaining that knuckle heights, it's kind of similar to something Ermes Gasparini, for example, would do against Vitaly Laletin. And you can see too that he's not taking some sort of unrealistic grip. He doesn't have a ton of coverage around his opponent's hands. I think that this is a grip he probably can get against AUDEN. So if he's practicing with that grip, he's practicing with not having a comfortable grip, that's going to be good for him when it comes to the actual match. So once again, even though James is starting with the low knuckle position, he often manages to switch that around and to end up with the higher knuckle position. He's still forcing his opponents to kind of drag underneath and hold on to him to a certain degree. So I like this style from James. Of course, he's still somewhat new to the sport, so it looks maybe a little bit robotic, but overall, I think it looks very good, especially considering his strength. And finally, perhaps the most impressive thing in this whole video, we see James English versus Mika Sagvarlidze. Mika is someone who's been on Arm Wars. He's no joke if you haven't heard of him before. He's had pretty solid matches with people like Dallas Langston. I think he got very close to defeating Uncle John at Arm Wars, had a really good war with him left-handed. And he's one of those kind of skinnier, taller top rolls, so he's going to do a very good job of mimicking what AUDEN LARRATT will feel like for James English. So we see him hitting this open top roll, and you can see that James is losing his wrist to a certain degree. Now, of course, James is probably tired at this point. He did a full wrist workout and has been pulling. But what I think is especially problematic, potentially for AUDEN, is notice how James still has this ability to contain, even if his wrist is back a little bit. He's doing this kind of Todd Hutchings style. He's clamping down with his fingers, even if his wrist goes back a little bit. And notice how he is top rolling through his thumb. We see this perfect angle right here. This looks extremely similar to the Devin versus Levon match, for example, where Devin is able to hit that full King's move and he is able to crack back the wrist. Mika here is playing the role of Devin, of course, and James is playing the role of Levon, but James still has enough back pressure and side pressure. He's able to top roll through his thumb, Todd Hutchings style, and he's able to get the pin by doing this. Another thing that we see in this practice is that James does say that he has that flop press available to him if he needs it, but overall it's looking to me like it's going to be very, very difficult for Auden to break through James' cupping. James' cupping is super, super impressive to me, especially with someone who has his hand size. And the problem for Auden is that what we saw from James is that he still has the ability to pull. Even if he loses his wrist to a certain degree, he can still use that Todd roll kind of top roll. So what that means is that if Auden kind of uses all of his pressure, all of his gas tank, just to get through the fingertips of James English, the match is not over, and James has a whole other move that he can go to. He has multiple moves, either a top roll without his wrist, or he can switch to that flop press. So this may cause some pretty big efficiency problems for Auden, where Auden is, I don't think he's going to be able to hook James or to go inside with him. I think he's going to have to top roll him, but if he uses all of his top roll just to crack James' wrist back, but James still has multiple other moves he can go to, whereas Auden does not have other moves he can go to, this is going to weigh heavily in the favor of James because he will effectively have a much bigger gas tank. So let me know what you guys thought about all this, but I was really, really impressed by this lift from James, and I think overall his table movement is pretty solid. If Auden is able to beat James English in this match, I'm going to be super, super impressed because James is clearly very, very strong in my opinion. I think this will be a really, really solid test for Auden's level, and I can't wait to see it in a little bit over 2 weeks.